Coteaz, Inquisitor Torquemada Coteaz of the Ordo Malleus. Looks like he's going to be getting a new miniature in the near future. However, this video is about the miniature released in 2003, during the latter days of Warhammer 40,000 3rd edition. Let's look at his rules from the time, and revamp the old miniature, him and his silly bird. " 2003 saw the release of Codex Demon Hunters, a 64-page book containing rules, background and hobby information pertaining to the fielding of a demon hunter's army, along with entries for units such as Inquisitors and their henchmen and Grey Knights. There was a section for our man Coteaz, Lord Inquisitor and High Protector of the Formosa sector. White Dwarf 279 heralds the release of this miniature, along with Inquisitorial henchmen and new Grey Knights. If you wanted to purchase Coteaz and his retinue, the box would set you back £18. If you wanted to purchase additional henchmen for your Lord Inquisitor, you could obtain blisters at £6 each, which contained 3 henchmen and 2 servo skulls. Henchmen came in several flavours: familiars, hierophants, acolytes, warriors, sages and mystics. The Coteaz box came with 2 servo skulls and 4 other henchmen. The servo skulls and cherub are familiars. The other henchmen are a gun servitor, a type of warrior, a logis, a type of sage, and an interrogator, which is a kind of acolyte. The models in this set were metal. Later on, Coteaz was released as a single miniature in fine cast resin. The fine cast range was released in 2011 and showcased in June's edition of White Dwarf number 378. I presume Coteaz was released about the same time, but this time he was a single miniature, resin, and without his plucky henchmen. And this is the miniature which I possess. It's languished in my bits box for the last decade or so, acquired as part of a larger job lot from eBay. The model has been painted, but I think I can improve on it, so that's what I'm going to do here. From the looks of it, there's only a few mould lines that need removing, and any that aren't noticeable really don't matter. I don't want to strip it. Stripping resin, in my experience, is not as satisfying as stripping metal, so I'm going to go full hobby sacrilege here, and paint over the existing paint job, using the original Games Workshop pictures for this model as a rough guide. But you must know this is definitely not a tutorial. If you're new to painting, there might be something you can use. If you're a talented painter, you might leave this session worse off. You have been warned. Looking at this model, there was a lot of white in the recesses, which is not ideal since you want dark colours there instead. If for no other reason, then if you miss a detail, it's harder to see. To remedy this, I took a mixture of 50-50 Vallejo black and water and slopped it into every recess, which includes armour joints, folds of his cloak, and under his budgie's claws. When that was dry, it was time to tackle the armour. I toyed with trying a bit of non-metallic metal for the gold armour, but I wanted to get this painted in a day, so metallic gold it would have to be. When I paint gold, I prefer to put down a coat of flat brown first by Vallejo, which is similar to Mournfang brown by Citadel. The reason for this is that it means I don't need as many coats of gold, since the brown underneath gives it enough richness by itself. In addition, I can leave some brown in the recesses as a kind of shade. While that was drying, I take a deep red, namely Burnt Cadmium Red by Vallejo, and paint this all over the cloak, and on the crotch cloth at the front. My aim here was to lay down the darkest shade for this part of the model, and build up layers of highlights thereafter. I also applied this red to the shaft of his hammer. I will warn you now, the order in which I paint this is going to seem a bit illogical, but my reasoning is, I switched to a different area while I'm waiting for the paint to dry in the previous one. Returning to the armour, I started painting on some Dwarven gold by Metal and Alchemy, which is my favourite gold paint at the moment. If you've watched my other videos, this will not be a surprise to you. I use it a lot, and this pot seems to be as bottomless as my army painter gunmetal. There's not much skill here, except I try to stroke my brush towards the edge of the armour, and avoid the overlaps and recesses. Even though there's a few large flat areas here, I use a small brush for the necessary control. and he comes out bright and shiny, which is fine. Next I go to Army Painter Gunmetal and apply this all over his hammer, except the lines and the cracks. The end of the shaft gets a coat of this as well, and so do the chains around his neck and his book tied at his waist. Back to the cloak. I mix the red I used before with Citadel Mephiston Red and paint this on the raised areas of the folds. My preferred technique is to brush perpendicular to the folds to make it look more like material. I think painting in the same direction of the folds on the cloak makes it harder to blend the colours, for me anyway. Speaking of blending, I cracked right on with highlighting the cloak, the next colour being Dark Vermillion by Vallejo. Again using perpendicular strokes but covering less area. Following that, I repeated the process with Vallejo Orange Red, and finally with Orange Red mixed with Dark Sand to give a lighter orange. With each subsequent step, I made the lines thinner and shorter. I used the Orange Red on the edges of the cloak also, and highlighted one more time with that lighter orange mix from before. Off camera, I also used these colours on the shaft of the hammer, but I used more of a dry brush technique to build up the highlights. And here's the result of all that work. Time for some armour shading. I like to shade my gold with Reikland Fleshshade, and this occasion was no exception, applying it liberally all over the model. On the hammer, I used a black wash on some of the lower portions to tick the shading box there. When the Reikland Fleshshade was dry, I picked up the Dwarven gold again and applied it to the armour to bring back some of the shine. Again, I used my smallest brush and focused on the areas that would catch the most light. In fact, I covered slightly more area because this would not be the final highlight. The next highlight, which again would not be the last, was some of the Dwarven gold mixed with a bright silver paint, which is a bit like Runefang Steel. This went on the edges of the armour and the tips of the rivets, the fingers and such. The final highlight was this silver, neat, on all the sharpest edges and rivets, and I'm actually very pleased how this armour has turned out. While this silver was to hand, I edge highlighted the head of the hammer, and the edge of the shaft as well. With the minimum amount of paint on my brush, I painted the hairiest edge of the chains around his neck and the book. Coteaz is an Inquisitor in the Ordo Malleus. That's the branch of the Inquisition tasked with the responsibility of investigating and destroying the physical manifestations of chaos throughout the Imperium. Whew, what a sentence. You may notice the model of Coteaz possesses an hourglass, and this is intrinsically tied to his lore, not just a handy tool for cooking the perfect poached egg. The tales have it that the hourglass is a symbol of Coteaz's authority as much as his demon hammer was. Every heretic brought before the Inquisitor would have until the sands had run their course to confess their crimes. One such victim of his judgment was Inquisitor Laradian, who was, during the turn of the hourglass, found guilty of warpcraft, practicing the forbidden arts, and heresy against the God Emperor. Coteaz himself executed him and fired his ashes into the heart of a star. That's such a badass way to be buried. Let me just find my will. Equally and significantly dedicated, pure and ruthless, Coteaz became a terrifying figure throughout his sector, the sight of his hourglass striking terror into the hearts of those on its receiving end. Many would confess their blasphemies before a hand was laid upon it. His reputation was such that in the end, many claimed, the mention of his name alone was enough to end the threat of the diabolic. If you wanted to take Inquisitor Lord Torquemada Coteaz in your Demon Hunters army in 3rd edition, the price was 185 points. That and the inability to take demon hosts to represent his puritanical nature. Only an army of 1500 points or more could take Coteaz. He came equipped with a bolt pistol, anointed demon hammer, artificer armour, giving a 2+ armour save, refractor field, giving a 5+ invulnerable save, grimoire of true names, and of course his Gloverdan eagle. Coteaz is also a trained psyker and can use the banishment and scourging powers. Coteaz's demon hammer is a special kind of demon hammer. If you take Coteaz, no other character may have a demon hammer, since only one per army was permitted. Like other demon hammers, it is treated as a thunder hammer, which strikes in initiative order when fighting a demon. Coteaz's special hammer could also re-roll failed to wound rolls. The Grimoire of True Names is a book containing the names of all demons encountered by the Order. Since knowledge of a demon's name gives one power over it, demons in base contact with Coteaz halve their weapon skill, rounding down. The Glovodan Eagle is a gift from the Adeptus Mechanicus, and the Inquisitor's eyes and ears on the battlefield. The effect in-game is +1 initiative and attack, both included in his profile already. The Eagle doesn't count towards the number of allowed henchmen, or take up room in a transport. I guess he could perch on top anyway. Coteaz has 2 more special rules. Destroyer of Demons results in demons having -1 to their leadership values if within 6 inches of Coteaz. This is cumulative with other related effects, such as those from Grey Knights or Hierophants. Then there's the High Protector of Formosa special rule, which allows Coteaz to have up to 15 henchmen rather than the usual 3 to 12 of a Lord Inquisitor. He can take 0 to 4 of any one type, and take a transport, as long as everyone can fit inside. Now there's a load of details left to do, but I'm going to do them off camera to save time. Here's before, and here's after I've applied some red to the Inquisition symbol and the wax seal. Next I used a light grey to paint some skulls and the other parts of the Inquisition symbol. And the part we've all been waiting for, the bird, which the 3rd edition codex calls the Glovodan Eagle. Now I don't paint birds much, well, not the feathered kind, but I imagine some dry brushing and shading is the way to go here rather than edge highlighting each feather. I start with an old brown paint called Vermin Brown, and paint this all over the body, save the heads and claws. Yes, it has 2 heads, and why not? Both heads got a few thinned coats of dark sand by Vallejo. For the feet, I started with a mix of Screamer Pink and a flesh tone, and then went back over this with the army painter Barbarian Flesh alone. I left the black undercoat showing in places for some high contrast shadows. For Coteaz's face, I started with Tan Earth and Barbarian Flesh mixed together, which made him look like a thin your paints meme. Yeah, he looks awful here. When that dried, I applied some pure Barbarian Flesh, and later highlighted this with the flesh colour mixed with white. I'll admit it's not the best face I've ever done, but I have a solution to save it somewhat. On the bird, I dry brushed the body with Tan Earth, and then some dark sand, brushing downwards to catch the ends of the feathers. For the heads, I highlighted with a rough dry brush of white, and later the beaks got a coat of Averland Sunset, but there was still more detail to add later on. I hadn't tackled the fur on his cloak yet, but my solution was to paint this first with some flat brown mixed with water, and when that was dry, I used the same dry brushing as on the bird. Tan Earth first, and then afterwards dark sand, just trying to catch the hairiest edge of the clumps of fur. Off camera, I painted the mechanical details on the eagle with a base of black paint, but the rest would wait until later, since I had been saving some unfinished areas for the oil paint. I used a tiny blob of some Burnt Umber oil paint and thinned it with white spirit before slopping it all over the bird, all over the hammer shaft, and on his face. You may have used or seen oil paints in action before, and I rate them as cheap alternatives to washes, with the advantage of being able to remove them later. When the oils were dry, I used some thin black paint on the eyes, and to add a bit more definition to the beak of the eagle. Off camera, I painted the mechanical parts silver over the black base, and then used green and red on the wires. The mechanical eye was also red, because this eagle is channeling T-800 Terminator vibes. Also off camera, the bird's claws were painted first Tan Earth, and then dark sand. The final step is the base, which I first painted black, then highlighted the sand texture with Thunderhawk Blue, and finally dry brushed Fenrisian Grey. The rim was painted with army painter Goblin Green, in the style of the original miniature when the studio painters at GW were moving away from all-over Goblin Green bases, but still wanted the rims to be Goblin Green. And here he is, Inquisitor Coteaz, painted in about 4 hours, rescued from my bits box, just in time for the latest internet drama. It's no competition winner, but I'm sure it looks fine from 3 feet away. It's a cool model, and the epitome of 40k in my opinion. Over the top, and highly detailed, which this resin still does a decent job of capturing. My only reservation is the hammer shaft is a bit bendy. Never mind, I'm pleased with the gold armour and the fur, which was stupidly fast to do. And oil paints were a quick way to add shading, which is nice. The Golvadan Eagle is no doubt my favourite detail. I love a quirky familiar for a character, and this guy takes the biscuit. I mean, he has a bionic eye, so of course he will steal your biscuit. In fact, with 2 heads, he's half-inching all of your biscuits. It's just a shame I don't have a retinue for him. Although now I'm thinking, I could add one for him. Maybe I could use these sanctioned psychers, and this Imperial pilot, and a servitor, and whoever this is, and Ogrin Santa, and sadly GW don't stock this model anymore. Sold out online. I guess you could check eBay or something, but damn. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video, even though it's a slight break from my usual 2nd edition content. Maybe you have this guy or one of the other old Inquisitors lying around in your bits box. Maybe it's time to get him out and give him some love. If you do, let me know how you got on in the comments. I'd love to hear about such a project. If 2nd edition Warhammer 40k scratches your itch, then watch this space. I release a video every 2 weeks usually. And why not check out my Instagram too? And with that, I better go paint some more minis. Take care, and thanks for watching. Fear apostates the hourglass of Inquisitor Coteaz, smashes foes with a demon hammer in the most impressive manner. His 2-headed eagle flies above, relaying data or lack thereof. Hidden names the book will tell, to banish demons back to hell. Fear apostates the hourglass, now your judgment comes to pass. The hourglass, oh the hourglass, heretics confess en masse, and then they all start passing gas. Even that attractive lass at the sands within the hourglass. The hourglass, oh the hourglass. Take care, and thanks for watching.